I'm going to spend 5 minutes now talking about analysis of information in a humanitarian emergency. Because we have in an emergency a mountain of information from many different sources and levels. Much of it is hearsay, some of it is spoken at a cluster meeting perhaps. Some of it is based on surveys, some of it is information from before, some of it are numbers get thrown around that seem to come from nowhere. You are bombarded by information. People who are gathering information for humanitarian assessment very often get information down on paper but don't do enough analysis of it. As if taking all the information that's flying by and catching it in a net and just putting it down on paper was the job. That's only the first step of the job, but this is not a difficult job. In 5 minutes, you'll see all the basic elements. So let's get started. There are 3 components to analysis, fundamental components. The first is the summarization of information. The second are comparisons of various parts of the information, and the third is its interpretation. I'll hit these one by one. Summarizing information is more than getting it down. It means that you take whatever information you have and you figure out what like information you have, as if you were putting information in different piles. You have to reach comparison, in the next step you have to organize the information so that like is with like. Like involves 3 components. Identification of the population that you're talking about, identification of the sector that it relates to, and identification of the geographic area from which the people were drawn. If you have those 3 things, you can know how to group the data. The social group may be everyone in a particular region or a township, but very often information is available only on a particular group or a group of interest. It may be on a minority population. It may be on agriculturists versus pastoralists. It may be on the people who are displaced from their homes, or it may be on the people who are not displaced from their homes, still in their homes. Whatever information you have about here's how many people there are who need things, or who are beneficiaries receiving things, or here's the level of need we anticipate, or here's the number of people who are injured. There probably is explicit or implicit information on what group that is, whether that represents the whole or a subgroup of the population. There's probably information on the geographic area they come from. And if you don't have that where you have the number written down, you can go to the person or find the source, usually, and they'll tell you in 2 seconds that this was from the entire region, or we went to 3 towns. You'll find it there on paper or from the people quite easily. So you know that if it says 1,000 people have been affected, whether you're talking about the people who are after the bridge or the people on both sides of the bridge in that region. And the third is the information on the sector for which to which the information refers. Some information is multi-sector, and when we're talking about how many people live in an area, that's essentially relevant for all sectors, because there may be a certain number of people with a disease, a certain number of kids who are malnourished, a certain number of people who have lost their households, but they come from a base of population that's larger. The whole population of people, or the whole number of households in a geographic area, would be the base from which those who have lost their house comes. Then you actually establish a rate if you have both the numerator, the number affected, and the population from which they come, the denominator. When you have a rate, you can start interpreting and comparing very well. But even with numbers, if you peg them to a geographic area, a sector, and the population involved, then you have a pile of information from various sources. Some of it numerical, some of it impressionistic, some of it from opinions from leaders, whatever. If you can put it in that pile, you can work with it and compare it. And then you'll have 5, 10, 15, 20 piles of information, each for which you can go to start making comparisons. In comparisons, we can't predict which comparisons are going to be important and relevant. But when you've got like compared to like, You will figure that out very quickly. You probably already have an impression from knowing something about the area and from hearing some of it from people who have been in the area about what's important. But until you actually take that information and make the specific comparisons, you won't know for sure. Some of your impressions will be wrong, some of them will be borne out from the data. Some of them will be worse than you thought, some of them will be not as bad as you thought. That's the process of sifting the data, be it qualitative or quantitative data, and turning it into information. One of the most powerful comparisons possible is a comparison over time. If I have 80,000 people who I say are displaced and in need, that means an entirely different thing to me. If I say that a month ago 500,000 people were displaced and now only 80,000 are left, than if I were to say that recently things were good and normal and pretty much everybody was in their homes and suddenly there are 80,000 displaced people. So I have not just the information at this moment, but how we got to this moment tells me a great deal about what their condition is now, and it permits me to make some comments about the implications in the future. Which way is it going? What's the process happening now? I'm not saying make predictions about the future, but what does yesterday and today tell you about today and tomorrow? You can make those comparisons in a reasonable way that somebody else can compare and say they agree or disagree if you have comparable information over time. You may, instead of comparing over time, compare one region to another, or the number in need in one sector to another, or the number of cases of a disease in older people compared to younger people. Any potential comparison of this type may be relevant, and when you find things that are the same where you thought they were different, that might be important. When you find that it's different where you believe it had been the same or there's reason to believe it had been the same before, that might be important. All of these comparisons is the substance of analysis, and you taking the effort to make those comparisons, you are the person who then can show others from all of these possible comparisons and all of this mountain of imperfect and unequal data, here are the pieces that stood out as important. It's that decision about what seems to be important and the explanation of why it seems to be important, which is the interpretation, the third stage. If you're making a report of all of the data, and if you're showing every possible comparison, you're not interpreting. Interpreting means from the universe of information, here's what I found to be important, and some explanation of why it seems important to you. If you've got that up front, you could put all the information in Access or in tables or online for people to refer to. But almost everybody is going to be much more interested in what you found to be important and your justification as to why it was important. Okay, the information's imperfect. The precision with which we can interpret it is limited. You can say, here's the difference that I found. Here's why I think it's important. And at the same time, you can give some impression as to how confident you are that this is the case. We have only a few samples, but they consistently show this high level of difference. That's one way to say how much information we have. You may have only one piece of information. This alarming change in the rate found from this survey tells us that we have to look at related information from other regions, or we have to look at this again, because we're not sure how constant it is, but it is important if it is. So you get to not only communicate the differences, but also something about the consistency and the quality and the comprehensiveness of the information that you were gathering, from which you drew that implication. If you get people saying it, and if you get the data showing it, and if the data in these regions are very different from the data from the regions over there, you actually probably will have a lot of confidence that this is a real and important difference, and you can communicate that in only a few words to say why you got to that point. Analysis compares what was with what is between one group and another, and there's something about what is and what can be, or what is and what should be. We have 30 agencies that have been mobilized to this region and have been providing assistance for a month. Yet we have data only on a small number of beneficiaries. We think people haven't been reached who need to be reached. That would be an analytical result from the interpretation of that data. I can't tell you what you're going to find, but I can tell you that if you're doing these comparisons, you're communicating to people why you thought so, and they can examine it and help to figure out what the next steps are. That's analysis.